Hello, everyone that's tuning in. Hello, we're going to start here in a bit. Let time for some people to come in. Make sure I'm centered. My bunny seems to be. There we go. Perfect. So there's a chat. Should be to the right of your screen if you happen to be at a desktop, if you're looking through the browser there. If you happen to be mobile, I'm assuming it might be below the video. In any case, feel free to reach out and ask any questions that you may have regarding career. I'll be hanging out here for about an hour to answer any questions that you have. And in between questions, I'll be sharing different things that I have been through in my own career journey. And definitely feel free to let me know where you all are from, what you happen to be doing in your career at the moment, what do you want to do in your career as well, and say hi. And I'm going to give it one more minute at 11:05 my time, California time, just to give a couple more people time to come on in, and then I'll start by sharing who I am. All right, 11:05 as I promised. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream that I am doing with Pluralsight. My name is April Speight. I am a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft on the spatial computing team, and today I am here to chat with you all on behalf of Pluralsight for a live AMA about career and to answer any sort of career questions that you may have. I'm going to share more about my journey and where I've come from working in luxury fashion to today working in programming. I focus in the area of mixed reality, but I've done a lot of work with Python and chatbots and so on and so forth. So I'm going to share with you my journey. Thanks for tuning in. If you're looking here through YouTube, there should be a chat. If you happen to be on a computer, it'll be to the right of the screen. If you happen to be mobile, it might be below. In any case, definitely send in your questions, comments, whatever you may have to that chat. I'll be sure to respond to them. And I do have something here so far that says, I got your book for my nephews. Thank you so much for your support. I am hoping that your nephews enjoy the book, that they also learn a lot about Python, and also I'm not sure if they're younger or if they're older, but that it does help set that foundation as they're continuing their programming journey. And so, speaking of book, for those of you who may not even know who I am, I authored a book. I would say it's 2020 now. It was published 2021 now. My goodness, I'm living in the past. And it was published 2020. The book is titled Bite Size Python: An Introduction to Python Programming. And I wrote the book for younger learners. However, from speaking with folks throughout the past year, I've had all ages who have purchased the book to use for learning Python. The book itself was written to give you a foundational understanding so that way you can progress to whatever happens to be next as it relates to Python. So all the basics are in there, and then from the completion of that book, you can graduate to something that might be a bit more advanced. Really good suggestion for me. If I were starting with that book, it would be conversational AI. So doing things with chatbots, which happens to be one of my favorites. I have a thank you for Coder in Chief. Thanks. And I personally feel that with that book, it's a little different than some other books for a younger audience. I do focus a lot and heavily on the foundational information. I don't necessarily intertwine the topics too much into different, how do I say, not exercises, but it's more so focused on if you were in, let's say, grade school and you had a textbook and that book told you step 1 through 5 of how to do something, that's how the book is set up. So hopefully for those of you who are interested in learning Python, you check it out. It's called Bite-Sized Python, an introduction to Python programming. There is, let me see if I can get you all the link to it if you want to find it. I'm going to type it in the browser here. One second, everyone. So I have it on my website, the actual link to it, but I do know the book is available in a couple places, including Amazon and also Barnes & Noble. I've had a lot of folks who've told me that they've been to Barnes & Noble to see the book. But fun fact, I haven't seen it in real life yet. Well, I've seen it in real life. I have copies, but I haven't seen it out in the wild at actual bookstores. I just haven't had a chance to go to a bookstore, honestly. Given what's happening right now. I'm going to paste the link on my website where you can find the locations, and also check with your smaller local indie bookstores as well. Some of them do have the book. Some of them will actually order in the book for you if you're interested, but definitely support small businesses. I'm going to put in the link in the chat right now for everyone. And before I get to the next comment, one more thing. If you happen to be looking for a code editor, I have a second book that's coming out within the next couple of months or so, which is Visual Studio Code for Python programmers. So it's that next step, but I'm not going to focus on that too much. I'm going to get to the next comment here, which is, please let me know how I could proceed with my career with C++ and Python. So anytime anyone happens to ask me what it is they should do to actually reach their goals in career, my number one thing I like to ask them is, what is it that you even want to do? When you know that you like a certain programming language, that's great, but take that a step further and get an idea of what exactly is your end goal. What can you see yourself doing every day? And it's not a matter of knowing like what sort of like super niche technology you want to get into. I know for me, starting out when I decided to do Python, I know I liked doing analysis with data, so I thought I would do data science. Turns out I didn't like it too much, which was completely fine, but at that point I knew enough Python, and so I thought to myself, okay, what do I want to work with? And I knew that I liked working with chatbots and smart assistants, and so I didn't have a title in mind of what I want to do. More so I had an idea of what area I wanted to work in. So from there, I started learning everything under the sun that I could find regarding to conversational design and working with different sort of devices that you can speak with. So one thing that I did after figuring that out was I started with my end goal and then I worked backwards. So I knew at the very end, I wanted to be able to do stuff with chatbots. What I ended up doing was going to the internet and actually looking at jobs first. Not looking to apply to them, but more so to see what the job descriptions entailed and what sort of requirements they were looking for. And I did that for a handful of jobs, so not just two. I did it for a couple of jobs because those requirements, they're going to vary by company. And so with that said, once I had a chance to look at a couple of job descriptions and requirements, I then compared them all to see what sort of common denominators existed. Whatever was common across different career descriptions or job descriptions, I then went through and I ticked off which ones I already had under my belt in terms of stuff that I knew. And then I highlighted the different skills that I needed that I didn't know, different technologies that I needed to ramp up on. Those ones that I highlighted as things I needed to work on or improve, I then took it a step back. And then I went to go see, well, what courses are available that I can take, or what sort of resources are available that I can take to now learn those things. What I found often is that Sometimes I would even have to take it a step back more to see, okay, well, what prerequisites do I need to even learn this technology? So that's what I mean by working backwards, starting out with what it is that you want to do, and then figuring out what you're missing or need to improve on, and then working backwards to help find resources. And then from there, that's when I started learning. I started tuning in to chatting with people who already had that experience for just more advice. And so if you're at a point where you know everything it is to know about, in this case, C++ or Python, then that's when you start getting an idea of, again, what it is that you actually want to do, and using that to guide your career search. What you may find sometimes is that as you're doing your search, it may come to a point where you realize that you might not want to do that, and it's completely fair. I feel like for those of us in the career working professional world, it happens. I say that to say that it's okay to pivot. I know some folks start to get a little discouraged when they realize one day that they actually don't like what they wanted to go do. But I'd rather people do something where they seem more happy in, as opposed to something that they feel stuck in. So that would be my best advice in terms of the original question of how do you proceed with your career. Figure out what it is that you want to do, and if you don't have all the skills, start to work backwards to figure out what you need to learn, and then start learning those things. Also, you don't have to be perfect in all the different requirements that are asked in these job descriptions. There are definitely roles out there, and most roles, honestly, where you can actually learn once you start the job. Yes, there are some companies that require that you must know every single thing. Typically, honestly, a lot of those positions are because they have an immediate need to backfill someone's position who may have resigned from that role, and they need to keep the ball rolling to keep whatever is happening. That does happen. However, in most cases, you don't need to have every single thing perfect, because there's so much more opportunity to learn. So I did want to let you all in on that. All right, let's see. Hey, Jeremy. All right. So what do you think about sticking to the Pythonic way of doing things? When is it okay to stray off that path? So for someone who's done some work in Python, I feel that one repeating thing that I've run into, especially as I used to work with Python docs, is that everything needs to be Pythonic. That's one thing I would say that's probably been more or less hammered into my head when it comes to working with Python. So to answer your question though, overall, Jeremy, I would say it probably depends on what it is that you're doing. But I would say, just from my experience, general rule of thumb is, if you're working with Python, make sure you're going to be Pythonic. I know some folks may feel different, and if that's the case, definitely mention that in the chat. Okay. Coder-in-Chief said, that's what I did before getting a job as a DevOps engineer. That path just helps a lot. So yeah, make sure that you get an idea of what you want to do and figure out what it is you need to learn. All right, someone asked, I'm assuming that's to me, how am I? I am actually doing okay. I actually just moved Monday, and we finished unpacking yesterday, so it's been quite some time. Okay, is it possible to be a data engineer without knowing Python? So there are some other languages that may be required for you to do things within that particular area of tech. I personally only took the Python path, but what I would suggest is, similar to before, look to see in those sort of roles what programming languages are needed, and that'll give you an idea what else it is. If you're trying to go this route, if you're trying to go to the route of knowing no programming languages, I will say it'll likely be a bit more difficult to find a role in that area. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it might be a bit more difficult. So therefore, if Python isn't your jam and you don't want to learn Python at all, I would say, as you're searching for what data engineer to job descriptions look like, 9 times out of 10, it'll say what programming languages are necessary. See there if there's any other languages that might be helpful. And I know even like these days, there's so much different technological advances as it relates to doing a lot of things with data. So there are options if you want to go that low code, no code route of trying to do analysis and creating graphs and such. But if you want to look more at that engineer side, there's likely a programming language that's necessary. All right. So someone just came, they said, what do I do as a job? So I work at Microsoft. I am a cloud advocate and I work in the area of spatial computing. And so I do a lot within the area of mixed reality. So as if you ever check out what we do in mixed reality, we consider it to be a spectrum. One end you have augmented reality, the other end you have virtual reality. And so that's the area that I'm in. As of late, I started doing a lot more with virtual reality. Before, I did a lot with HoloLens, and so that's more on that AR side of things. But as of late, I've been trying to get more involved with like alt space VR. In terms of what the actual, as an advocate, what do? I spend a lot of time with you all. I spend a bulk of my time in the community providing different resources to help introduce you all to that particular area of tech. And so a lot of content creation, I would say my job's about 80% content creation. So whether that's doing documentation that you'll find on Microsoft Docs or creating tutorials for Microsoft Learn, blog posts that explains different products and tools that we have. I speak at events as well, and different videos, tutorials, whether it's on Microsoft channels or my own personal channels. At one point, I was streaming on Twitch and going through Unity to show how to set up different projects. I haven't had a chance to do that in a while, and it's always up in the air as if I'll get back to doing that. But then also there's a lot of strategy in my job, so it's not just sitting around all day hanging out on the internet. There is a lot of strategy and planning as it relates to creating this content. If there's other people who needs to be involved, making sure that the logistics behind that is coordinated properly, especially when we're hosting events. We have to make sure that everything is put together very well for you all, so that way when you tune in, things look great. And then also providing any community help if people happen to be stuck on something that they're creating and they need someone to come help them. That's where, as advocate, we come into play. We can help with those particular questions that you may have. And so to answer your question, I hope that gives a bit more context. That's what it is that I do. Prior to that, however, I spent 6 years, I want to say, as a project manager and then a program manager. That one was a bit more behind the scenes compared to what I do now, which is like very front row center in front of everyone. But as a PM, I helped initially rolling out software to different clients. And then when I came to Microsoft, I started as a program manager, and it was to bring interactive features to our docs.microsoft.com platform. A lot of collaboration with our engineering team, design team. Depending on what's being created, there might be some tie-ins with marketing. Depending on what technology area, then there's tie-ins with like the product team. So a lot of the planning and managing multiple projects at once, or programs at once, if you will. So that's just a bit more background about what I do. Okay. So are some Python courses you suggest for mixed reality? So I'm assuming, are there? Sorry, I saw your correction. Are there any Python courses you suggest for mixed reality, AR, and crypto? So unfortunately not. When I decided to come over to the world of AR, I actually learned a new programming language. I started learning C#. And so if you're looking for C#, I would say courses. It's a Microsoft thing, so you can definitely head over to Microsoft Learn. There's actually a really great learning path on getting started with C#, and I've done that myself. I can see if I can find the link for you. I haven't done anything with crypto per se, I would say. If you are using Python, though, there is a lot of sources. Pluralsight has courses. For me personally, when I got started, I started with Codecademy. I had a chat with someone recently about this. Codecademy as well as Udacity. But one thing I will say is don't stick with just one resource for learning. What I found is that a lot of different instructors, they don't provide the full spectrum of everything Python. And that's fair because there's so much when it comes to Python. So what I personally did was I would start with a certain course, like an online tutorial of just Python concepts. And then I would check out someone else's on like a different platform, so that way it can pick up where the other one may have left off, or it can fill in any gaps as well. But yeah, for C#, if you head over to Microsoft Learn, it's docs.microsoft.com/learn. There's C# resources there, and you can check that out. Okay. What do I think about wars with virtual reality? Confirm, are you speaking about like actual wars between groups of people? Or are you talking about from the perspective of different companies who creates things in VR? Let me know, then I can answer that. So what are my top tips for how to excel in my first year as a developer? Be open to asking questions. I feel that it can be very intimidating if you're starting out in your first dev job, especially if it's just your first job in general. Some folks tend to feel that they have to know everything, and then when they happen to get stuck, they're stuck for much longer than they should be because they are afraid to ask questions. Do not be afraid to reach out to different folks who are on your team for help. 9 times out of 10, they will help you, and more often they are there to also provide guidance as well, especially folks who are a bit more senior. So again, make sure that you are reaching out for help. The second thing I would say is pace yourself, given that as you are starting your job and there's different things to take on, you're going to find that there's some stuff that you also need to learn. Don't feel obligated to learn everything at once. Do take your time with learning. Otherwise, it can be very easy to stress yourself out especially when you're starting out in that first year. Let's see. The next thing I would say for first year is to, let's see. In addition to what I was saying, take your time learning, you also want to stay up to date with your skills. So if you happen to be a unicorn who got your first role and you're good to go, you're solid, you know all the technology that the company's using, that's fine. But every so often, check in with yourself from a knowledge perspective and stay up to date with your skills. Go learn something else. And if you happen to have an idea of any projects that might be coming down the pipeline, then see what sort of technologies are included with that and go learn them in advance before someone comes and tells you to learn it. That's one thing about career, especially when you start thinking about career progression, is to take initiative to do things. You don't always have to wait for someone to give you instructions on something to do or what needs to be done. If you take that initiative, that's really going to help, especially as you're meeting with your managers and such, and you're looking at promotions as well. So those are, I would say, be my top tips. All right, next thing I have is, I believe AR is in use on like the Apache helicopter on the headsets. And the reaction when I say C#, I will say honestly, for so long I thought I would only have to know Python. So when it was time to actually learn a new language, I would say it was night and day for me getting started with C#. But I've gotten to a point where things have gotten significantly better now. But yeah, I feel like now I'm okay only knowing those 2 languages. I know some folks out there, they happen to know a lot of languages, and that's totally cool too. One thing I can say that's really helpful if you do find yourself learning or having a need to learn more than one language, or if you just want to do it for fun, is learn one language first, because a lot of what you're going to learn with that is going to help set the stage from a syntax perspective with learning another language. So yes, the syntax and that's going to be the structure, if you will, of the language. Yes, they are different amongst all the different languages, but it does help create those ties between the 2. So like for me, for example, I had an issue with just understanding conditional statements when it comes to C#. And it didn't really click until I started to realize just how almost similar it is to the way things are done in Python. So having that knowledge of another language first is really helpful. I would suggest not learning multiple languages at once, unless you have like a business case, meaning like your job's making you or needs you to learn multiple languages at once. Other than that, learn one and then move on to another one. I can say this confidently that I don't believe there's any one person on this earth who knows everything about a language and can 100% recall all that information without having to look it up. So with that said, as you're learning you'll probably never get to a point where you know any and everything and then can go back and recite it all. That's just not realistic. We have so much happening in our brains that I don't think it's realistic. So with that said, as you're learning things, just do recognize that there's some concepts that'll just click and you'll know it from like the back of your hand if someone was to ask. And then there's some concepts that you'll need to do a search for if someone happens to ask a questions or if you're creating something. And that's fine. No one expects you to know everything there is to know about a programming language. So I did want to put that out there. So we have that C# is awesome and think that it's incredible that Guido van Rossum and Anders Halsberg, if I'm saying it correctly, are now having meetings together at Microsoft. So super exciting. What do you think it's going to take to start teaching Python in elementary class as a starting language? I think I can't even talk straight. I think it depends on the curriculum for the actual schools. So I say that because I've actually had teachers who have reached out when my own like Python book came out that had mentioned that they were buying the books for their students in the classroom. So a lot of that does come down to what the curriculum is for that particular school district or that classroom. I've had a chance to speak with students in elementary school that may have like robotics clubs, for example, or they happen to have an actual course in their school that teaches programming at that age, and they've learned Python as well. So a lot of that does come down to whatever the curriculum is for that particular school district or that school. I would have to say from what I've noticed is that more often schools who have their programs, no, that's a lie. I was about to say something else that's not a lie. But what I will say is that, again, curriculum is what it comes down to. If you happen to have children and you want them to learn in school, I mean, bring it up at the any sort of connections you have, whether it's like parent-teacher association meetings or PTA meetings, and make a case for it to be brought into the schools. That's my little spiel on schools. So from Facebook, we have, how do you get started on technical blogging and when new in the field and not a multi-year expert yet? What can you bring of interest to others in writing tech posts? Ooh, I love that. So I started out actually doing technical posts and I wasn't even a developer when I started doing that. I did it because that's honestly how I learn. I have to reiterate information that I learned teach information I learned for me to actually have a solid understanding. So with that said, getting started with a technical blog, just do it, honestly. No one's going to give you the heads up that you should start doing it now. Just go do it. If you're wondering where to even do it, it depends on how much exposure you want. So if you want something that anyone by chance with a large platform can stumble upon it, there are websites that are public, such as Dev2. Huge fan of Dev2. That's dev.to. And you can write on there. There's a nice beginner audience on there. And so come up with a topic that sounds interesting and go write about it. And if you can't think of any topics, then the next time you're working through something and you're stuck on it and then you resolve whatever that issue is, that's a topic that you can write about. I know there's times where I've been in the middle of, I think one time I was having an issue with skyboxes in Unity, which a skybox is essentially when you're in, let's say, like a virtual space, the way that you can see everything around you, like from a 360-degree view, where it might look like an outdoor scene, for example. That's like working with a skybox. Couldn't figure it out for the life of me. And then after doing some searches, I found an answer, and then I went and blogged about it, because now, I can refer back to that whenever I need another help with that. And also, there's probably someone else out there that don't know how to do it. Think of it this way. I'm going to use a conditional statement example I gave earlier. Let's say that you don't know how to do a conditional statement. I'm going to use Python in this example in Python. I can guarantee you, if you were to just do a search for Python conditional statements, and I'm frozen. I'm not frozen anymore. That goes to show you that there's so many different folks who write about similar topics, and that's okay. And I think that's okay because what I've learned from my experience is that you can't necessarily rely on just one person to teach this one topic. People learn in various different formats in various different ways. I know for me, some stuff doesn't click with the first article that I pull up. So then I go search again and I go to maybe like the fifth one and finally I get it. Your perspective is going to be different than someone else's perspective. And that's super helpful for people who are learning, because you might end up being that one article that actually explains it in a way that makes sense to them. And then if your technical blog isn't necessarily a how-to do something, it can always just be you sharing something that you created. People like to see projects. People like to see what's possible with certain technology. You can always create a blog post about why you created something and then showcase and maybe share with some of your favorite features. But all that's to say, if you want to be a technical blogger, just go do it. No one's going to give you the heads up that you should do it. And then again, bringing up interest to tech posts. As I said, there's a lot, whether it's how-tos, whether it's just showing cool things, whether it's a matter of, I would narrow it down to those two things. And also, no one's going to tell you that you're blogging wrong. It's your blog. So the way that you want to do it is the way that you're going to do it, and no one can tell you that you're blogging in the wrong manner. Another one from Facebook. I always wondered, what is Python used for? Why use Python versus JavaScript? So sorry, my ear's itching. So with Python, it really depends on what you're creating. A really good example, when I was working with robots last year with Misty Robotics, there was the option to program the robot to do various different things, whether you wanted to use C# or JavaScript or Python. And I believe it was Python with a wrapper. So with that said, there are some things that you can create with more than one language. And when it comes down to that, sometimes it's a matter of personal preference. Sometimes it's a matter of people thinking that one program is more approachable from a learning perspective than another. For some folks, it just happens to be this programming language that they know, and they don't want to go learn another programming language. So it comes down to the individual, and it's all relative to who the person is. But like I said, what's really great is that there are some things that you can create and work with without only knowing either Python or JavaScript. Another really good example, I've done a lot with Twilio and working with their voice messaging and their SMS messaging and communications and stuff with their actual chat bots. And there was different languages that you can use. There wasn't just any one language that you needed. So personal preference. So how long at the beginning of my coding did you land your first position using Python, and what do you believe was most challenging, or what additional skills did you need to develop after starting? So when I first started learning Python, I think I was a little different than most people because I was still a project manager, and I didn't start actively looking for anything related to Python until probably maybe a year after I actually got serious with Python. It was a year later, and that's because, like I said, I wasn't actively looking for Python roles. I know for some folks, they can start learning and then 6 months later they can find a position. Some people, it takes a little bit longer. I think all of that really depends on the person. When I actually did start looking for roles, by that point, I had done so much community work already in Python, because for me, what was more important was teaching people so that way they can go do whatever they wanted with Python. So by that point, I had done a lot of YouTube videos, for example, which was really helpful because now I had proof that I actually understood Python. When I got my first role where I actually used Python, it actually wasn't a programming role, believe it or not. It was my program manager role when I first came to Microsoft. Because I had a Python background, I was able to help out with our Python reference documentation. And having that understanding is really helpful, because knowing how Python programmers think makes a big difference when it comes to help with any sort of updates or structuring a documentation for working with Python. So that's one other thing I wanted to put out there, is that if you are learning a programming language, coding isn't necessarily your only option. For me, having that background helped with doing PM. However, it wasn't until I started learning C#, I would say the July of 2019, And then in 2020, I started my job where January 2020, I started my job where I had to know C sharp. So that was about 6 months later is when I actually found something. And again, I started learning C sharp because I wanted to do stuff in the mixed reality space, but I knew I needed to know C sharp. So I didn't start looking for something until I felt more comfortable with it. And so the first position that I was interested in, that's what I got. And that's the role that I'm in now. So again, the numbers that I'm giving out, they differ for everyone. Don't feel that because I did it in 6 months, you have to do it in 6 months. And don't feel that just because you might be a little longer in your journey means that there's any issue with, who you are as a person. It's completely fair to take as long as you need or as short as you need. One thing I will say as well is don't be discouraged by others who might seem to progress a little faster. We're different. We all learn at different speeds. You also don't know what they have in terms of network that's helping them get whatever jobs it is that they're getting. So I like to have people stay in your own lane. Every time I do any sort of talk about my own personal career journey, I always leave with the advice of stay in your own lane, focus on yourself, and when something is right for you, it will definitely come to be. What do I believe was the most challenging, or what additional skills did you need to develop after starting? So most challenging, I would say, for me, it was confidence, honestly. It wasn't necessarily anything about the language. It was me having the confidence to even feel that I was capable. So again, this was a brand new language that I started with, which was C sharp. And so even after I started the position, I always felt that like one day someone's going to out me and realize that I'm not a C sharp genius. And I've been in my position now for a year and 4 months, and I'm still learning stuff with C sharp. I'm still taking time to even further that knowledge. So the confidence, I would say, would honestly have been the challenging part. Unless you've been hired to be an expert in a certain area, I would say be a little more kind to yourself as you're starting out, especially in your first dev role. And even like if it's a new dev role, I've come across people who may have already been in a dev role and then they switch companies and they find it like super intimidating because everyone else has so much knowledge. And that's fine. Try to talk yourself down a bit more and realize that we're all human. And if you still feel that you're very just not at the level of everyone that you're working with, spend some time upskilling, spend some time getting those skills up to par, find what it is exactly that you don't know, and then just go at it and learn it. Let's see. What additional skills did you need to develop after starting? So for me, because rather than, I could do from both languages. So for Python, because I was doing more stuff with reference docs, some of the skills that I personally needed to further develop, honestly, was trying to find all the different use cases of how people are using documentation. And honestly, that was a lot of documentation research from different folks who have Python reference docs. As I was writing my books, that's a different situation. For the first book, I think getting a little bit more into being very detailed about why certain things or how certain things are done in Python, that I would say was something that I had to further a bit more. As I was writing my second book, I would say that book is like a little bit more deep in the woods, especially with certain technologies that I just don't use on a day-to-day basis. And so really good example is working with containers. And I know there's a question here about Dockerizing Python. I hadn't done anything honestly with containers before I started writing that area of my book. I knew a very basic foundation of what that was, but that was something that I had to go and learn. Fortunately, there are a lot of resources on the internet for that particular topic. But as it relates to my actual job, as I was doing C#, some things that I had to learn a bit more of, it was really not one particular area. It was really just really understanding syntax and when I should and shouldn't do certain things. I even still today, when I'm doing scripting in Unity, I still sometimes get mixed up with defining methods because if I'm not mistaken, you call it first and then you actually define it below, which to me is like bizarre. But in any case, just really understanding better ways to structure code, I would say, was one thing for me. All right. Hello to this person who said hi. So what am I currently excited about? Learning. For me, because I'm doing more in the VR space right now, I'm excited to get super, super deep with doing things with VR, especially as it relates to alt space. There's been so many different cool events that have happened last year, and I want to get to a point where someone can approach me and say, April, how can I do this thing in alt space? And I'm just able to just say what it is. We are doing things, and I can't talk too much about it, but we are doing things with Microsoft Mesh, and so I'm excited to do even more with that area. And also, because I will be doing more things with VR, in addition to alt space, I'm also creating some apps and sharing that with the community, so that way folks can understand how to do more with that and integrate the mixed reality toolkit, which is a toolkit that I talked about a lot last year. It's a toolkit that helps accelerate your app development. There's a lot of features included that you can add to your different apps that you're creating without having to do all the heavy lifting of getting some sort of interactivity to work in with your app in Unity. And so those I would say would be my top 3 things. All right. So what do you think about Dockerizing Python apps? So again, as I mentioned, that was something that was new to me. From the perspective of someone who did it now, I can say I don't really have an opinion on it. Sorry, unfortunately. Can a DevOps person become a developer? If so, how can we do that working in an organization? So it depends. If you're in a certain organization that has, I'm assuming, developer positions open, then it's a matter of being able to provide the my boyfriend always says it, like the cachet, meaning like your ability to do whatever it is that you want to do. If I'm assuming if you have programming languages and if you already work somewhere and you want to just do an internal transfer somewhere, definitely get someone on your side that can speak to your experience. So that way, as you are trying to transfer elsewhere, then they can speak for you. If you're working in DevOps and if you don't necessarily have the language skills that are needed, you got to learn it. That's the one thing I would say. Do I necessarily have to go to college to master Python? So I will tell you, Mr. Technology, I went to college and I went to grad school and I did not study programming for either of those. I actually did international business for my first degree, and then I did luxury and fashion management for my graduate degree. So at no point in college did I take any sort of computer science courses at all, not even just as an elective. So with that said, you don't need to go to college to master Python or really any programming language. Nowadays, there are a lot of people who self-learn, whether that's through doing different tutorials and such, online, reading different blog posts. That's honestly what I did. I didn't go to any boot camps. I did a lot of different coursework on like places like Pluralsight, for example, and chatting with people who had more experience than myself. I was very fortunate to have coworkers who were happy to help out as I had different coding questions, and they were able to be helpful. Now, that's not to say not to go to college at all. For some folks, it's a better approach for them. It really comes down to what it is that you want. Because I went to college, even though it wasn't for programming, I always tell people that if you want the experience, then college is great. If you're just going, though, because you think you need to go to college to get a job, I will definitely say that's not necessarily the case. Do recognize that not everyone's fortunate to go to college for free. I definitely have the loans to prove that. So if it's within your budget to go to college, by all means, sure, but it's not necessarily a requirement to master any programming language. All right. There is no need to apologize for the non-technical question. You adore the floral sequin shirt. Where is it from? Thank you. This one is from, I think it's called Dream Sister Jane. I'm going to feel so bad. Or like Sister Jane. Let me see. I think I'm typing it, so sorry if you hear my keyboard. It's called Sister Jane, and they are based, I believe, in London. But thank you. I got it during last year's quarantine. Now I've been adopted as a coding cousin. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right, so continue to send your questions in. I'm gonna hang out with you all for about another 15 minutes. So one thing I do want to chat about as it relates to career is, as you are looking for that job, your very first job, it does not hurt to have a network of individuals that can help you out. When I first started job searching, especially even just working in tech, I did a lot of what I called cold applying, meaning I knew no one at the company, so I was just sending resumes in and just hoping for the best. And that's not necessarily an optimal approach for job searching. It does really help when you know someone internal at a company. I recognize that that's not the case for everyone, and I can attest to that. My stomach just growled. I can attest to that because that's what it was for me. When I started looking for jobs, I didn't know anyone, so I just had to hope that someone took mercy on me and hired me. But as time goes on, people that you start to know in the community, people that you start to know at work, for example, stay in touch with them. And don't necessarily think that you have to meet people and only use them because you want to be able to use them for something that you need later. Actually form genuine relationships with folks. And you never know who you may meet that can really help jumpstart your career. They don't necessarily have to be, senior level at a certain job. And they also don't even necessarily have to work in tech. I've known people who happen to have known someone who works at a tech company and they were able to help someone else out get a position. So with that said, starting to grow your network, especially when you're first starting out, is very helpful. My current job, or when I started at Microsoft, for example, I only found that because it was on Twitter. One of my, we're coworkers now, but someone on my prior team, he had tweeted that a position was open, and I sent him a direct message, and that's how I got to learn about the job that I first had when I first started at Microsoft. So you never really know where different roles can pop up, I would say. So that's something that I did want to touch upon as well. Let me see what else. Interviewing. I'm not the biggest fan of interviewing. I think some folks might love it. If you do, good, kudos to you. I am not the biggest fan of interviewing. However, that doesn't mean that I haven't learned a lot throughout the way with interviewing. One thing I can say that has been super helpful is over preparing, because you never know what sort of questions are going to come up. I know as it relates to being a developer, there are definitely code challenges that you might come across. And what I can say has been very helpful is if you are applying to jobs where you are doing some sort of take home as it relates to programming, there are various resources online that you can use to prepare for that, and make use of it. I would say as you're starting to interview, don't treat it as just this thing that you don't have to take serious. Take it serious. Ramp up on the skills that you actually need. And then also, if you happen to know folks who already work there, chat with them to get an idea what sort of things that you might need to be aware of for the actual interview process. Every so often, people will reach out to me just to ask me even what it's like working at a company as well, or what the interview process was like. And I'll just tell them up front what my experience was. And I think that's really helpful too as you're preparing for your interviews as well. Any recommendations on good places to go for networking as a new dev? So my initial go-to was always Twitter when people ask about that, but recognizing that Twitter is not necessarily the best place for everyone. There is also places that are not Twitter that are great. So I mentioned Dev2 earlier. That's, give me 1 second. I keep feeling my stomach growling. So Dev2 is really great. You can start to build community on there, especially if you are leaving comments on people's posts, for example. What I've come to find, and I know we do this over in Mixed Reality Land, as you're going through different documentation, more or less, there's probably like links to community chats available, like Discords, for example. go to those. Oh, I heard something. Go to those different forums to chat with people. And that's how you really get to learn more people. Attend events as well. There's a lot of tech events, especially now that we're doing everything virtual. There's so many events that happen, and a lot of these events are getting more sophisticated with their platforms, whereas they have an opportunity for people to actually chat. Even like right now with this AMA, people can chat, get to know one another. Same with Twitch. I'm not saying start a Twitch channel, but tune into people's live streams, because if you continue to go to people's streams, let's say like consistently, then you get to meet the same people probably. And that's honestly how I got to know some people, even just from Twitch, because they were tuning into my live streams weekly. So various places you can definitely meet people who work in tech. It doesn't only have to be Twitter. I know a lot of people are on Twitter that work in tech, but that's not the only place that you can go to network. All right. Would I recommend a small or large company for a first job, and what is the difference in the environment? I've worked at both big and small, and I've worked in both big and small in different roles. So I would say it really comes down to what you're looking for in a position. I'm at the point in my 7-year career where I don't want to go anywhere else. I don't want to have to interview ever again for anything. And I feel like if I get tired of what I'm doing, I at most want to do an internal transfer and not having to start from scratch. That's where a big company comes into play. With big companies, 9 times out of 10, especially if it's in tech, there are various different internal orgs and teams that might be of interest to you. So that way, let's say you spend 1 year doing one thing and then you realize 2 years later that you're just tired of it and you want something else. Then you can internally transfer to another role, and it might be a bit easier rather than someone coming from the outside. Working with large companies have a lot of benefits as it relates to meeting actually a really good amount of people. Since I would say Microsoft's been my first large company I've ever worked with, and just the amount of people I've had a chance to actually meet and opportunities has been vast. Now, when I worked at a startup, very small, we had, I don't know, maybe it was like 30 of us, so like very small. I actually really liked working there because it was a small, tight-knit group. With large companies, yes, there are a lot of people to meet, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to meet everyone. Whereas with a smaller company, especially if it has like fewer employees, there's a better chance that you're going to get to know everyone. You will get, at least for me, because I'm a very talkative person and I like getting to know people. There is more opportunity to actually develop an even deeper and closer work relationship with people, which is really great. So other perks of small companies as well is that I feel like your work is more visible as well. That's not to say that when you're at a large company, your work's not more visible, but with the smaller companies, because it's only a handful of people who work there, you really, the stuff that you do really gets put front row and center as well, which if that's what you're looking for, then that's good too. The thing about small companies as well, if they're a startup and let's say they're much newer, you'll probably end up wearing a lot of hats as well. So that's something to think about as well, given that they're still establishing themselves. There are some what I happen to call progressive startups, meaning that they've been around for like years, but they're still a startup. They're a bit more established, and so you're likely really just be doing the one role that you've been hired to do. But when it comes to large or small, there's benefits to both. There's pros and cons to both, and I've done it both. Honestly, if I had to say which has been my favorite, I don't have one. I feel that each size serves its purpose, and I'm just thankful to be able to actually say that I know what that's like. All right. Any more questions? Because folks, I'm heading out in 4 minutes. So let me know if you have any more questions. And of course, if you don't happen to have any questions now, you're more than welcome to also reach out later. I'm going to drop in my Twitter handle for you all. And then on my website in the contact section, there's going to be an info page. Let me grab that for you too, where if you just want to send something to me via email, that's also cool as well. So let me get all that for you right now. And I'm gonna keep my eyes on the chat in the interim. let's see. So the first thing I'm going to give you, oh, you know what? The contact page on my website actually also has my Twitter. So I'm just going to post that there for everyone. Oops. Computer keeps changing on me. All right. So what do I wish someone had told me when I started as a dev? Sorry, I'm gonna get some water. What I wish someone would have told me, and I've said this earlier a lot, was, and that's why I emphasize it because I had to learn it myself, that no one knows everything. I started out thinking that once I got to a point where I'd be working on a team of folks that are developers, that I would have to know every single thing, and because they're so much more smarter than me. And that's not necessarily the case. You will find that everyone has their strengths. I think that's fair to say. There are some people who might be stronger than you in certain areas, but also realize that there might be things that you're going to be stronger at more than other people. And so for me, it was recognizing that I didn't have to know every single thing about a language, for example, or a certain technology area, and getting over that fear that I won't be good enough. So that's one thing I wish someone had taught to me. So what's the best way to get promoted at a big company? For me, what has helped is to be upfront about what it is that you want. And I know that's going to definitely vary for people. I have yet to go to any job and not state during the interview what my end goal is here at this job. So that's actually how I got my actual first job in tech, because I started as an intern with a tech organization. And during that interview, I said, even though I'm applying for or interviewing for an intern role, I want to be a full-time employee here. And literally from day one of that position, my manager and I worked together to get me at a point where I was technically, meaning technical, so technically as well as, technically, I guess, ready for the position. And I would say maybe like 3 months later, I actually got a full-time offer. Here in my current role that I'm in with Microsoft, heading into working in this area of spatial computing, I've always let my manager know up front what it is that I want to do as my end goal. And so throughout the year, that's what we work on together, to find any sort of areas that I might be weaker in, so that way I can build up those things. Being vocal about what it is that you want, I feel personally early on, is more helpful than to one day pop up out of nowhere and say, hey, when am I getting promoted? I know for some folks, the promotion process might be a bit different, but I can say what's worked best for me is just being very upfront from the beginning of, this is what I want to achieve. Let's work towards me achieving what that thing is. All right. I have a person here that says, thanks for sharing and for your time, and you're very welcome. With that said, we are at the top of the hour for this live stream. As I mentioned, my name is April Speight. I am more than happy to chat with you all on Twitter if you have any career questions. I did place a link to my contact information in the chat. Feel free to utilize that page to either send me an email or find my Twitter for your convenience. I'm going to put that Twitter handle here in the chat for everyone. All right, it's in there. And I hope you all enjoyed this. Best of luck as you are creating your careers, progressing in your careers, and also, more important, helping people in their careers. Because once you get to a point where you feel like you've made it, reach back to people and help them as well with progressing, because I would love to see everyone achieve whatever it is that they want in their career. So with that said,